Thank you for tuning in to No Sudden Moves Radio. And remember, stay on the proven path so you don't risk falling behind. We are not business legends. We don't overthink it. Look around and see what everyone else is doing. If it's working for them, it will work for you.
Welcome to Wait It Out, where we believe there's no reason to act now. The opportunity will still be there when the timing is better.
The age of disruption isn't coming, it's here. And the boldest move isn't following the crowd, it's following your why. I'm Patrick Ledden, and you are listening to Disruption Lab. All right, I don't know exactly when this happened, but sometime in the late 70s, I was probably like 8 or 9 years old, we ended up with an Atari game system in our home. I don't remember getting it as a gift. I don't remember going out with my parents to buy it. It just showed up one day, probably from one of my older siblings for all I know. I remember where my parents kept it. I remember the rules around playing it, when you could play and how long you could play. And I remember the games. And I specifically remember one game that was my favorite. Today, I'm joined by Ethan Zoubek. He's the current president of Atari, and we're going to talk about disruption in an industry that just keeps disrupting itself time and time again. We'll talk about how they produce games, hardware, licensing agreements, and we'll also talk a little bit about that game that really caught my fancy back in the day. Because what I learned over the course of time is Atari has changed a lot and will continue to change going into the future. And there's a lot of insights you can learn from Atari and from Ethan that are applicable in your world. Hey, Ethan Zoubek, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, Patrick. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, too. As I'm looking at you on screen, I see the Atari on your shirt. And I have to tell you, from very early on in my life, I had some Atari issues back in the day, as you would say. I remember getting an Atari game system probably around 1979, 1980, something like that. Mm-hmm. And, all the games that were the rage were things like, over those years, were like Pitfall, yep. And was it Tank Battle, I guess, Tank Battle, Asteroids.
Combat.
Combat, yeah. I remember when Pac-Man came out, mm-hmm. But the game that I was kind of addicted to back in the day, see if you know this one, was Adventure.
Of course, yeah.
I loved that game, and the idea that you had some secret eggs hidden in there was always fun, too.
Yeah, so Warren Robinette was the developer of Adventure, and it has the prestige of being the first video game with an Easter egg in it. And the Easter egg at the end of Adventure is if you play it all the way through, at the end there's a stream, and his name is developed by Warren Robinette, was embedded into the game, and he didn't have permission to do that. Back in the day, Atari did not name their developers.
So I remember seeing that. I was just blown away because there was no internet to tell you that was out there. You just had to kind of learn about that word of mouth that it was there. But that was pretty amazing. But, this is a podcast around disruption and change. Atari's gone through some changes since back in the day when I was playing those games, hasn't it?
It has quite a few.
So what are you guys up to these days? And tell me a little bit about your role too.
Sure. So I'm president of Atari, so I sit across the operating functions of the business, and we're a fairly diverse business these days. We have three core things that we focus on. We develop and publish video games. That's the core business. We have a hardware business, which I can talk about, and we have a licensing business. And we touch and focus really on being the center of retro in the video game space. But the company is 2 months younger than I. The company is 54 years old, so it was founded in June of 1972. So we've been around for a while and have been in a number of people's hands over that time.
No doubt about it. When I look at the idea of the games, and then you said licensing as well as hardware, it's fairly diversified. I think that in many of people's minds, there's probably a nostalgia component. Just like I said, I remember playing Adventure, and I would imagine that plays into the licensing side, perhaps some as well. But, when you look across that portfolio, where do you see things kind of growing and changing and being disrupted?
So there's a number of things as it relates to the licensing side of things, and you think about the impact of nostalgia on commercial prospects. We chartered a study a number of years ago because it was important for us and for our partners to understand which of our IPs, and for those not familiar with the term IP stands for intellectual property. So it's a noun. So Star Wars is an IP, Centipede is an IP. Harry Potter is an IP, as an example. So of our IPs in our portfolio, of which there are many hundreds, which really stood out, and we were really pleased. It was curious to find that, despite all of the major games that we've published over the years, the thing that stood out the most was the Atari joystick. That unique seminal joystick with the red dot,
right. Yeah.
And then right behind that was the Fuji logo, the logo that I have on my shirt right now, which is considered to be one of the most iconic, well-designed logos ever made in the history of commerce.
That's funny because when you mentioned the joystick, of course I remember that, but then my mind went to, wasn't there another device that came with the system or you could buy with the system? Because I seem like I remember something for the game Pong that you could dial or turn or something like that, right?
There's a dial that you could buy, and that dial works with a number of titles. But Pong was the first game that we ever published, and in the spirit of disruption, Atari, for all intents and purposes, invented the video game industry. It did not exist prior to Nolan Bushnell, who was the founder of Atari, and Ted Dabney, his partner, bringing video games into the consumer lexicon. And the way that they started with that was, and Nolan was a computer science major at the University of Utah as an engineer. But I remember he told me years ago, we were talking, he said, "Ethan, at the end of the day, I'm a carny. He's a carnival guy. He grew up around amusement parks and carnivals. So he was always thinking about how do you entertain people? How do you create, compelling systems and environments to drive commerce? So one of the first games that Atari developed was Pong. It's a very simple game. You've got two paddles on either side and a ball that moves, and it makes a sound when a well-known sound to many at this point in time. And they decided, we need to test this to see if it works. So what Nolan and then Al Acorn, who was the primary engineer on the project, did was they took their Pong cabinet and put it in Andy Capp's Tavern down the street in Sunnyvale, California, because they wanted to see how it worked. And they put a box on top of a barrel, and there was a coin box like you see next to, like at a supermarket, you go out and you see the horse and you put your quarters in the box. Yep. They attached a coin box to it. And they sat there and they had a drink and people played, and they thought, all right, we'll see how this goes. Well, about a week later, they got a call from the owner of the tavern saying, "You got to come in and fix this thing. It's broken." So this was late at night on a Friday night. So Al, went down wondering, did something happen with the motherboard, or what was the point of failure? Well, the issue with the unit was that the coin box that was collecting the quarters had filled up so much that it had gone into the system. It wasn't accepting any quarters anymore. It was so successful that it effectively broke itself. And that's how they knew that they were onto something.
You're like, hot dog, we're onto something here. Drinks on us tonight. Yeah, that's amazing. That's an amazing thing. It really did disrupt so many things. I mean, I disrupted my house sometimes when my parents were like, put that device down. But it disrupted my friend group when it was like, when's the new game that's at the arcade? Because the only place you could play a game was at the arcade. Made it onto your platform. It's just continued to, in so many ways, probably disrupt the world in ways that people like myself may not even know. Is that fair?
Absolutely. The following the release of Pong in 1972. As you note, an arcade generation developed beyond that. And there were a number of manufacturers creating arcade cabinets. And then in 1977, we released the Atari VCS, Video Computer System is what it stands for, otherwise known as the Atari 2600. And that is the wood-grained, like when you say the Atari console, that's what people think of, is the Atari 2600. And that was the first in-home console that had ever been made commercially available. And it transformed the world. You could not do that before. Now Pong there was a home version of Pong, but to have a cartridge-based video game system where you could have a range of games that you could play, it birthed an industry, and the entire industry exploded from that point.
Yeah, that explosion brought a lot of other players into the place, didn't it?
It did. It absolutely did. What ended up being, so that was in 1977, and it continued to grow and evolve. A team of Atari engineers and developers left Atari to form Activision, which is now, very famous video game studio and company. And Activision is responsible for Pitfall. Pitfall is an Activision game. So Activision published a number of cartridges for the 2600, and then a range of other companies were publishing games, and it ended up being so successful, and there were so many that there was a glut of games on the market, and supply really outstripped demand. And in 1983, there was what is called the great crash of the video game market. There was just too much, and consumers had sort of grown weary of that, so everything had settled down at that point. And then soon thereafter, Nintendo entered, and with their Nintendo Entertainment System, and that started shifting some of the fidelity of some of the games. And Atari continued to produce game systems both in North America and in Europe, but the 2600 was the most, without question, the most disruptive and iconic. I'll use that word a lot, probably iconic, of the systems we put out.
Oh, and it definitely is. It's iconic on the logo, like you said. It's like I can picture that device, sitting in front of me right now. It was like an 8-track in regard to you slide that game in there and it stuck out a little bit. Pretty simple black with the wood grain. Definitely can see it in my mind's eye. And even folks who maybe weren't around or my age back then playing those games, they can probably still picture them for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we re-released that product going on about 3.5 years ago. We re-released it for holiday. And there are a number of reasons why we did that, but specifically we made it slightly smaller. It's about 80% the size. We had it with HDMI out, so you could plug into modern televisions. And we worked with a partner on that and took really explicit care with what it felt like, with what the joystick felt like. This was not a throw it out and hope some people buy it and move on. Many, many, many months went into very precise crafting and care and tuning for that product, because we know the place that it holds in history, and we know how important it is to people and how much the experience of playing that game with their siblings or their parents or their friends meant to them growing up. So great care was taken. And the fun part about it is it plays actual cartridges. So if someone has an Asteroids cartridge up in their attic from, the early 80s, they can blow it off just like we all did and stick it in and it will play.
No way. I was wondering that when I was thinking about talking with you, because it's such a long lineage and so much, it's iconic, as you said. There's a lot of nostalgia connected to the system from the past. As a person who has a leadership role and a stewardship over this, how do you balance I want to disrupt and do new things, but also at the same time recognize things that maybe I shouldn't mess with that? I mean, what's the mindset around trying to figure out what's something you should touch and what's something you shouldn't touch?
We take great care with that. We to a person in the organization recognize that we are stewards of a brand. You'd used that word earlier. And we take that privilege and that responsibility very, very seriously. And that's been one of the things that has been exciting about our evolution over the past 5-6 years, has been that prior iterations of the company, the focus was less focused, and there were ventures into casinos in Africa and into mobile. And one of the things that we knew was really important was to bring it back to the core. Make games that are fun to play. Make games that bring people together. Publish games that do the same thing. And with everything that we do, we always do it with an eye towards the community, towards the fans. And that doesn't stop us from doing new things. We, without question, press into a range of new things. But we recognize that there's a history here, a 50-plus year history. And one of our core values, and we have 4 of them, one of them is long-term thinking. We're a publicly traded company. It would be easy to just focus on quarterly earnings and let that drive us. And while we are, of course, focused on the financial performance of the company, everything we do, we think about, how does this serve the next 50 years of Atari?
Yeah.
How does this ensure that the fans and the children of the people who grew up enjoying early Atari have that same kind of experience that feels real and feels authentic and meaningful to them? So it is woven into the fabric of everything we do.
One thing that I found as I was out talking about disruption, and James Patterson wrote about disruption, is the way at least we present it to the world might be a little different than people initially think about it. Because when you think about disruption, you think about blowing things up, changing everything, all of those type of things. And we make an argument in our research and in the book that sometimes the most disruptive thing you can do is to say no to change.
Yeah.
And when we all know that when we were children and your friends wanted to go do something and you're like, I don't think we're supposed to do that. And they all look at you like, come on, let's do it. You're the disruptive person in that moment because you're not going with the flow. So I love as you're kind of positioning it that is, we didn't call it change everything. You probably don't say we're going to change everything. There's some things we're like, these are things we're going to lean into and double down on. These things are we're going to go after. These are things that are core and essential to us, and kind of thinking through that. And when you think about the evolution of Atari these days, you mentioned over the last 5 years or so, where's Atari at today?
So just to draft off that point, of sort of the following the herd, and sometimes disruption is not doing that. When you look at the growth in the video game industry broadly today, it's a huge amount in China. There's a huge amount in mobile. And then interesting, Roblox is very large, and there's a lot of players. We think of young men. Some of the prevalence and pervasiveness now, for good or for ill, I would argue for ill, of online gambling, prediction markets. That's drawing a lot of attention. And as a media and entertainment company, the temptation to chase those things certainly exists and exists for many. But again, that's not what we're made of. That's not what we came from, and it does not align with our values of long-term thinking. We very much focus on having a growth mindset, and how can we as a company and as individuals always look for opportunities to grow and change and learn. We make mistakes all the time. It's only a problem if you don't learn from it. So to answer your question of where Atari is today, we are very, very focused on owning the retro space. And that means everything from our classic titles and IPs and doing new and interesting things with them, like Adventure, like Centipede, like Asteroids, as well as we own a number of game development studios who are specialized in working in very specific ways with classic titles. So one of them is a studio called Night Dive Studios. And if you want to play an old sort of first-person shooter like a Doom or a Quake or a Thief, which we just announced last weekend, Night Dive Studios is the best in the world at taking those old games that people loved from 10, 20, 25 years ago and bringing them through a remastering process where the art is changed, the game levels are tweaked and tuned so they can play on modern devices. So these games, again, that meant so much to so many years ago that aren't available, or if they are available, they're not in a form or a function that's as satisfying as modern titles. That studio makes them available to play just like you used to remember on modern consoles. And every time we announce that Night Dive is releasing a title, there's a wave of the community saying, they should do this next, they should do that, they should do this, because they're reliable and they're consistent. And we know what our fans want, what they need, and what's important. And we view preservation as a big component of our mission as well. So Digital Eclipse is another studio that we own. We just released a collection last winter of Mortal Kombat games, where we worked with Warner Brothers and NetherRealm Studios to bring a collection of the Mortal Kombat titles to modern devices as well. And what Digital Eclipse does is wraps all of those games, which are not now just playable on modern devices, but with the stories of how they came to be. So interviews with the original developers,
oh, wow,
sketches of the original art. It's almost like a museum piece. And we view that as a great privilege to be able to gather that information, curate it, and then share it with the community and with players. So not only are they playing the game, but they know the story behind that, because those stories, they'll get lost if we don't do that. That's why putting together Atari 50, which at our anniversary, and we did that with Digital Eclipse, just there's a wealth of information in that. It's considered to be one of the best game collections ever made. The games are great, sure, but the stories behind them, the way it's organized, the interactive nature of it, that'll last generations.
Do you find among generations that, I can see a parent taking their kid to Fenway Park and talking about what it was like to watch games when they were a kid there and things like that. I mean, do you feel like that same kind of bridging among generations or from one generation to the next plays out in video games too, especially when you would think, oh, well, the kids today want to play these games, but then actually they see value when they put something different in their hands?
Yeah, absolutely. Without question. We go to a lot of events and conferences and consumer events over the course of the year, every year. And some of the most fun are when there are events that are, for players in the community to come and interact with the media and entertainment properties they love. And without fail, minute after minute, parents and kids come up to our booth, and you can hear a father or a mother talking about with their child about their experience with some of our games from when they were children. And there's something about also about the nature of retro or nostalgic games. Pixelated styles, things like that. They don't have the same realistic sheen of a $100 million budget AAA title. And that's okay, because there's something about the simplicity of it that makes it feel accessible, that makes it feel real. And that's why we also think the physical component of things, like actually having a physical cartridge that you can touch and hold and open, collectors collect everything that we put out, because there's something about being connected to the physical world where so much is digital these days that it's almost like made for simpler times, and there's a rootedness to it that we find grounds people and without question spans generations.
Well, there's something about I haven't done a lot of game playing in honestly most of my adult life, to be honest with you, but I've noticed that the times I have, there's sometimes where it does feel so realistic, or it looks like you're almost watching a movie sometimes, but also feels like, am I really controlling this character, or is this character just doing things? I don't know what it's doing, and it's doing things, as opposed to, especially back, from I remember back in the day when I was playing these games, like there was a definite, causal effect. I move my hand, the character moves. There is no second guessing in my mind that I am. It's like driving a stick shift. I am in this thing, making this thing happen, which is really pretty cool.
Without actually, I drive a stick one of the rules is if you are my child and you learn to drive, you also learn to drive a stick. And so that notion of that visceral physical connection, that means something to me personally. And yes, it's just a different way of engaging with a world or a universe. It's interesting. Back in the day, the games were squares on screens, and there was not elegant artwork. Atari's key art, which is the cover art, like for the box, when you think about it, Breakout and the idea of a spaceship, like that was all that key art triggered the imagination of the players that they then filled in with their own experience. So it is definitely a different way of engaging with the medium, and both are great, right? I mean, some of those big budget AAA immersive games are amazing, and you get lost in the artistry, the skill, the precision of it. It's extraordinary. They, without question, have their place. There were too many of them, perhaps around COVID. Speaking about disruption, which is a major disruptor for our industry, there was a huge peak of growth, and it got a little overextended. And the industry's in a bit of a correction now, because of that. And there's we're seeing smaller budget games, a little quicker to market is a bit of the order of the day, and that's what we do. So we're right in the slipstream of where we feel the market is right now.
So being around for so many years, five decades plus. You mentioned earlier that I think you said in the 80s there was a bit of a correction that happened in the market there, as far as there was a glut of games, supply outstripping demand. Most recently during COVID, I imagine they've seen some kind of ups and downs and ebbs and flows of this business that some other organizations just aren't as well positioned because they haven't had that long track record.
I think it's a combination of track record and sort of knowing your roots, and then just enthusiasm and growing too much too quickly, sort of taking a number of data points and making a straight line out of it and operating on the presumption that straight line is going to continue. Yeah. The market can only support so many games coming out at any given point in time. It's gotten easier and easier for indie publishers to put out their own games. So there's a huge volume of games coming out at any given point in time. So it's kind of difficult for the signal to cut through the noise. And, with COVID, we had a lot of people sitting home playing video games. And so there was a lot of growth in the industry. So a number of folks doubled down, they staffed up studios, they greenlit major projects. Well, game development is, generally speaking, a multi-year life cycle from green light through to launch. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of studios have needed to either close down or trim staff, and it's been unfortunate. There's a lot of great talent out there in the market. Our ascendancy began at that point in time. So we have always operated in a run it lean, run it crisp type mindset that's allowed us to be very efficient. And the volume of titles that we publish, given the size of our team, it's extraordinary.
Where do you see, I imagine a lot of time as a senior leader in an organization, you spend a lot of time looking at what's the next mountain, what's the next horizon, whatever analogy you want to use, kind of these things. And you're watching what's going on in the world today. Obviously, you've watched it go from, as a company, you've watched it go from the creation of these systems to, my goodness, everything from PCs to laptops to mobile devices. You've seen everybody change in the technology. There's so much talk around disruption out there in general around AI and where that's going, how that's going to change the way we work and how much free time we might have to do certain things like this, how quickly we can create something new. From your perspective, when you're kind of sitting there going, okay, there's a lot of things changing out there, not to give away any secret sauce here, but where do you see the opportunities kind of showing up in the future?
So there's a couple of things, and I'll take the AI topic for a moment because it's germane in almost every industry. In the games industry, we see it, and this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but for the sake of discussion, AI's got application in three areas. One is utilities of doing the job, right? Code analysis, things like that, and we find that it's helpful in that regard. From a utility standpoint. Second is in artwork, right? The creation of artwork, generative AI. We feel very strongly that that's not a place for AI certainly in our company and broadly in our industry. And I'll come back to why in a moment. And then the third is in actually building net new games from whole cloth, which is not something that we do or we support generally, because at the end of the day, we believe video games are works of art. And the experience of playing a game and moving through the worlds and the environments and the characters and the narratives and the storylines, these are things that come from the human soul. And that is important, and that is meaningful, and that is irreplaceable. So we invest heavily in artwork for many of the games that we do, and we don't use machines to do that. We use artists to do that, because we believe so much that what comes through is a mark of the human experience, from which it was born. So it of course, its applicability in our industries and others is yet to be known. That story is not written. It will continue to evolve and emerge. The speed with which that's happening is staggering, but we have really found that it is an enabler in a great many ways, just like word processing was back in the day, and we'll continue to explore areas for that. But in those areas that we feel are the artistic areas, it's not something where we deploy it. Or at present think it has a place. As far as where do we see opportunities, kind of doing what we're doing. We have the benefit of having a number of studios and a publishing team that's in demand. We work with a ton of great partners who have tremendous IPs in their catalogs. I mean the Disneys and the Paramounts and the Warner Brothers and the Hasbros and the NBCs of the world all have tremendous catalogs of characters and games. We just announced in partnership with Mattel, a Barbie collection that we're going to be doing and releasing at the end of the year. That's got a metagame where a young player can get in and decorate the house and find things, and they can build their rooms and decorate, and they can find more items by going in and playing the old games. So we've taken this collection of old Barbie games from across the decades and made those available on modern devices. These are the games that a young girl's mom grew up playing. So they could play those things together. And there's a range of those opportunities that we have across our partners to continue to take. We did that with Toy Story with Disney. We've got a Toy Story collection coming out later this year. We announced a remaster of an old Godzilla game that we published back in the early 2000s. So there's a rich trove of these really amazing games, again, that meant a lot to a lot of people, that they can't play now, that we have some of the best studios at the world for bringing those back. So we're going to continue doing that. We're going to continue expanding our hardware line. That's been extremely well received, and that's been a ton of fun. And again, I think there's something meaningful about that visceral connection with the physical experience, holding something in the real world. I think people are really craving and yearning for these days.
I do think we live in a world right now, and I see it every day in my work, where people do crave for that human connection, a chance to interact with each other, where we're playing or working or whatever we might be doing. And I loved how you articulated the idea of, the question wasn't your answer wasn't, here's all the things AI can do. It was more nuanced in the answer of, where should we use it? Mm-hmm. Where should we use it based upon things that we value? So artistry matters to us. So therefore, we don't want to hand that over to something else. And I like that, because I sometimes I'll hear people ask, what rules should we put in place around AI? And I tend to think that to me personally, the question isn't what rule, because there's always going to be another iteration where you're constantly having to rewrite the rules. The question should really be like, what are the things that we're going to use to make our decisions about how we use AI that are going to be foundational things that we know we can lean into? Say, hey, we're not going to talk about the rule about every next version or release of ChatGPT that comes out, but what we can talk about is if it violates these things in our values, it's probably not the right thing for us.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's, as you were speaking, I was reminded of one of our core values. As I said, there are 4: long-term thinking, the convergence of passion and excellence, growth mindset, and drive. And there's subtext beneath each of those. But growth mindset is my personal favorite. And our leadership team, by the way, these are not things that we whipped up at a retreat just to check the box and say, we've got our core values, let's move on. We spent well over a year thinking about them, crafting each word of their description, and really making sure that they captured what was important to us and what we wanted to just pervade the company as a value. And this notion of growth mindset, which is there's always an opportunity to learn. There's always something that we could do differently, better. Let's be open to that. Right? Doesn't mean we have to do it, but let's be open to that. And I mean, I did not come from the video game industry. I've been at Atari for coming on 5 years. That means I've been in the video game industry for coming on 5 years. I was an enterprise software executive for 20 some odd years beyond that. So I had to learn video game development, video game publishing, licensing, intellectual property law, hardware, manufacturing, sourcing from China, all sorts of things. And it hurt. It disrupted my life. But the things that I've learned and that I've had the opportunity to experience by being open to doing something completely new, it's been transformative for me personally, and has, to our conversation earlier, it's helped me live a better life. The world is bigger for me now because of that.
It's funny, I'll ask people, like if I'm on a plane or something and somebody's traveling somewhere, or maybe if they start talking about where they've lived. I've lived in this city and I lived in that city. And inevitably when you ask, like, why does somebody live somewhere, why they move somewhere, the answer is they usually move for love, money, or adventure, or something, or some combination of the three. And I would imagine that there was probably, when you moved 5 years ago to a new role, and I don't know, you didn't move cities at that point, did you?
I did not, no.
Yeah, but you probably moved into that new role with a little bit of kind of love, money, and adventure on your mind in varying degrees. And I imagine you've probably found a lot of all 3 of those things.
It's interesting. Convergence of passion and excellence being one of our values. There's lots of people who love video games and are just thrilled to be part of the industry and around them. And we love that energy. That's the passion. We also need excellence, right? We need focus, we need discipline, we need execution, and great things happen, we find, at the point of convergence of those 2 things. I did not have a passion for video games. I played my Atari 2600 and my Nintendo NES growing up, but I've not been deeply steeped in video games all of my life. And what I have found is that has afforded me an opportunity to have a different perspective. And the primary reason that I'm here was actually to help out a friend of mine, right? The CEO of the company, who I've been very good friends with for a dozen years. He was chairman, and the board asked him to step into the CEO seat. And he knew that a lot of work needed to be done. He called me and asked me to help. So the thing that actually motivates me, it primarily is the opportunity to spend time with someone I care about and love and respect deeply, and to help build something meaningful and important. And then that bleeds into what Atari means to the world. I mean, this brand means so much for so many people that it's I used this phrase earlier, it's a privilege and a great responsibility to be able to be a steward of the brand. So those two components really are the things that are the driver. And it's nice to wake up each day knowing that you get to work with somebody and a great team that you care about, but also do something in service of a brand that means a lot to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I want people who are listening to this too. As you were telling that, Ethan, I was just smiling from ear to ear, listening to you talk about what drew you there and how much you enjoy it and the impact you see yourself happening. And I just want people who are listening to this right now, if you aren't in those type of spots in life, disrupt yourself. Go find them. They're out there, and it might be a little scary. It might require you to learn a lot of new things and grow and develop, but it might be just the right risk that you should take, the step you should take to put yourself in a place where you're working with people you admire and value. At the same time, you're doing work that's bringing value to a lot of people in the world. We always wrap up the conversation with a question. It started a number of months ago when my producer, Jess, said, "Hey, Patrick, you talk about disruption, you write about disruption, and you have the same habit every day that you drink the same coffee from the same place, the same vanilla latte from the same place." And she said, "Can you at least disrupt that?" So I've been trying new places and taking photos and putting in my newsletter every week. But my question for you is this: have you ever been on the quest for a perfect drink or a perfect meal or something like that, and you found it? And if so, what was it? Or are you currently on the quest for the perfect drink or meal?
So I'll answer that question. I'll answer a slightly different question, but but the first thing that came to my mind is actually, what would your last meal be? Because I have found the perfect meal, and that is a pepperoni pizza with mushroom and onion from Reservoir Pizzeria in South Orange, New Jersey, with an icy cold can of Coca-Cola and a pint of Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia ice cream. Done. I'm happy with that.
I'm going to have to check. Where's South Orange, New Jersey at?
South Orange, New Jersey is in northern New Jersey. It's about 9 miles as the crow flies outside of Manhattan. So I grew up there.
I got a brother who lives up that way. I'll have to ask him about it. If I want to go grab an Atari shirt, you must be selling these all over the place these days, because I see every time I see you, and you and I know each other, every time I see you, you have an Atari shirt on. Do you sell them online? Could people listen to this right now go buy an Atari shirt?
I appreciate the plug. Atari.com. We have a really, really vast offering of all sorts of things on Atari.com, from shirts to games to consoles to collectible items. We have a great family of licensees who have developed some incredible products, many of which are available. But Patrick, I do keep a stash here at the house, so I'll bring one for next time I know him.
I wasn't asking for freebie. I'll buy one for a friend. How's that?
I'll get one for Jamie too.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, man. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been wanting to get you on here for so long. I'm glad we finally made it happen, and I just wish you all the best. And just keep helping people bring back some of those memories.
Oh, likewise. It's a pleasure. Thank you, Patrick.
All right, take care.